Jack Montgomery stood at the window of his high-rise office, staring blankly at the Chicago skyline. The city pulsed with life below, but up here, it felt quiet, removed. He tightened his grip on the small silver pendant that hung around his neck, a habit that had become second nature ever since the accident. His thumb traced the smooth edges of the tiny locket, once belonging to his daughter, Sophia. It was the only thing they had found at the crash site, the only part of her that had survived. His mind, as always, drifted back to that day. The rain had come down in torrents, making the roads slick and treacherous. He had been late to the hospital, caught up in another meeting, another project. His wife and daughter were driving home from a weekend trip when a truck lost control. The phone call still echoed in his ears, words sharp like shards of glass. The paramedics had done everything they could, but it had been too late. Sophia and Clara were gone. Years had passed since then, but the pain hadn't softened. It had merely become a part of him, woven into the fabric of his existence. He had tried to fill the void by throwing himself into his philanthropy, building shelters, funding orphanages, and creating opportunities for children who had lost everything. If he couldn't save his own family, he could at least save someone else's. That was the reasoning, at least. But in truth, the work was only a salve for the open wound that never fully healed. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. Jack turned, reluctantly tearing himself from his thoughts. Mr. Montgomery? It was Maria, his assistant. She stood in the doorway, holding a tablet. You're due at St. Agnes in an hour. St. Agnes, the orphanage in the south side of Chicago, one of the first projects he'd funded after the accident. He nodded, straightening his tie. Thank you, Maria. I'll be ready in a minute. She hesitated for a moment, as if she wanted to say something more, but then just smiled and stepped out, leaving Jack alone again. He sighed and glanced once more at the skyline before slipping the locket under his shirt. Today was just another visit, another chance to give something back. But even as he told himself that, a strange, unfamiliar sense of anticipation stirred in his chest. The orphanage was buzzing with activity when Jack arrived. Children played in the courtyard, their laughter filling the air, a sharp contrast to the weight he felt pressing down on him. Father O'Reilly, the head of St. Agnes, greeted him at the entrance, his warm smile reaching the crinkles around his eyes. Jack, it's good to see you, the priest said, clasping Jack's hand in both of his own. The kids have been looking forward to your visit. Jack forced a smile, trying to shake off the heavy cloud that seemed to follow him wherever he went. It's good to be here, Father. They walked together through the halls, past walls lined with colorful drawings and photos of the children who had found a home here. Jack had been to dozens of orphanages over the years, but there was something about this place that always pulled him in. Maybe it was the warmth in the way the staff treated the children, or maybe it was just that this was one of his first major philanthropic projects after the accident. In some way, this place felt like the beginning of something for him. A new chapter, even if he didn't fully believe in new beginnings anymore. As they approached the common room, Father O'Reilly spoke quietly. There's a little girl here I think you should meet. She's different, a bit quieter than the others, but there's something special about her. I think you'll understand when you see her. Jack raised an eyebrow but said nothing. They stepped into the room, where several children were playing with toys or coloring at small tables. Among them was a little girl with dark hair and large, solemn eyes, sitting by herself at the corner of the room, staring intently at a puzzle she was piecing together. Father O'Reilly nodded toward her. That's Emily. Jack found himself drawn to the girl almost immediately. There was something in her posture, in the way she focused so intently on the task in front of her, that reminded him of Sophia. Without thinking, he moved toward her. Hi there, he said softly, crouching down beside her. What are you working on? Emily looked up, her deep brown eyes meeting his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She seemed to be studying him, as if trying to piece together a puzzle of her own. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, My mommy had a necklace like yours. Jack froze, the world around him blurring as her words echoed in his mind. He blinked, trying to process what she had just said. Slowly, he glanced down at the pendant hanging from his neck, the one he hadn't taken off since the day he lost Sophia. the same one she had been wearing the day of the accident. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked back at Emily, his mind racing. How could she know? He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the little girl. Her words echoed in his mind, growing louder with every passing second. My mommy had a necklace like yours. The room around him seemed to blur, the children's laughter and the sound of footsteps fading into the background. His eyes shifted to the delicate silver pendant around his neck, the one that had belonged to Sophia, the one she had been wearing the day of the accident. Where did you see a necklace like this? He asked, his voice trembling ever so slightly, though he tried to keep it steady. Emily didn't answer right away. She turned her attention back to her puzzle, her small hands moving pieces around as if the question hadn't shaken her the same way it had him. Finally, she shrugged lightly and said, My mommy wore it. She had it before I came here. Jack felt a strange, weighty pull in his chest. The girl had no idea what she had just done, the doors she had opened in his mind. His heart was racing, and for a moment, he didn't know how to respond. The logical part of him knew it was impossible. Sophia was gone, and with her, that necklace should have been lost forever. And yet, here was this girl, calmly mentioning a connection that shouldn't exist. He glanced over at Father O'Reilly, who was chatting with one of the caretakers across the room. There was no way he could ask him about this. Not yet. He needed more information, something concrete. Emily, he began carefully, choosing his words with the precision of a man walking on a tightrope. How long have you been here at St. Agnes? The little girl paused, her small fingers idly twisting a puzzle piece. She looked up at him again, and her brows furrowed slightly, as if she was trying to remember. A long time, she said, after a moment. I don't remember when I got here, but Father says I've been here since I was really little. Her words hit Jack harder than he expected. He felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him, the kind he hadn't felt in years. Sophia had been 7 when she died, or so he'd thought. But now, the tiniest sliver of hope was blooming in the darkest part of his heart, a possibility so fragile he didn't dare speak it out loud. What if there had been a mistake? What if Emily wasn't just a random girl, but somehow connected to his daughter's past? Do you remember anything about your parents? Jack pressed gently, trying not to alarm her. Emily's expression softened, and she shook her head. Not really. Just the necklace. Jack swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He knew he couldn't push her any further, not now, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that had settled deep in his chest, a feeling that something far bigger than coincidence was at play. He had to find out more, even if it meant reopening the wounds he'd worked so hard to close. He stood up, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. It was nice meeting you, Emily, he said, forcing a smile despite the whirlwind of emotions raging inside him. Nice to meet you too, she said softly, her eyes returning to her puzzle. Jack turned and walked toward Father O'Reilly, his mind spinning. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the air itself had thickened around him. Jack, is everything all right? Father O'Reilly asked, noticing the change in Jack's demeanor as he approached. I think I need to know more about that little girl, Jack said, his voice low but firm. Emily. Father O'Reilly's expression softened with understanding, though there was a hint of hesitation in his eyes. She's been through a lot, Jack. Came here when she was very young. Her records were incomplete. Her adoptive parents had passed away in a car accident. After that, she was placed in the system. Jack's blood ran cold. A car accident. The very words he had dreaded for years had come back to him, wrapped in layers of coincidence that now felt more like fate. He swallowed, trying to push down the rising tide of emotions. And there's nothing more about her biological family? Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. Father O'Reilly shook his head slowly. No, we tried to look into it when she first arrived, but it was a dead end. Her case was complicated. Jack nodded, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. He needed more than vague explanations. He needed answers, and he needed them now. I'll make a donation to the orphanage, Jack said suddenly, his voice sharper than he intended. A sizable one. But I need you to help me with something, Father. Father O'Reilly raised an eyebrow, surprised by Jack's sudden urgency. "Of course, Jack. What do you need?" Jack took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "I need access to any files or records you have on Emily. Anything, even the smallest detail. I have a feeling there's more to her story than what's in the paperwork." The priest hesitated for a moment, clearly torn, but after a few beats of silence, he nodded. "I'll do what I can. But, Jack, be careful. Emily's just a child. If you're thinking of pursuing this, you need to be absolutely sure. She's been through enough already." Jack forced a nod, though his mind was racing far ahead. "I know, but I can't shake the feeling that there's something I'm missing here." Father O'Reilly placed a hand on Jack's shoulder, his grip firm but kind. "Sometimes the past stays buried for a reason, Jack. But if this is something you need to do, I'll support you." Jack offered a tight smile, but inside, the storm of emotions swirled relentlessly. He wasn't just looking for closure anymore. He was searching for something much deeper, something that felt almost within reach, yet terrifyingly far away. Jack left the orphanage that afternoon feeling like he was walking in a fog. His heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of hope, confusion, and fear swirling inside him. The image of Emily's eyes, those familiar, deep brown eyes, haunted him. She looked so much like Sophia that it was almost painful. He couldn't let it go. He couldn't just walk away without knowing more. As he drove through the busy streets of Chicago, his mind raced with possibilities. Was it really possible that Emily was his daughter? Could there have been a mistake all those years ago? The thought was almost too much to bear, but something inside him refused to let it go. If there was even the slightest chance that Sophia had survived, he had to find out. He owed it to her, to his wife, and to himself. When he arrived at his office, he immediately called his private investigator, Tom Sanders. Tom had been with him for years, a reliable and discreet man who had handled many delicate situations for Jack in the past. This, however, was different. "Tom, I need you to look into something for me." "It's urgent," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady as he explained the situation. He told Tom about Emily, about her connection to the necklace, and about the accident. Tom listened quietly, not interrupting, his silence reassuring. "I'll look into it, Jack. I'll start with the hospital records from the day of the accident and see if there's any indication that your daughter survived. But, Jack, you know this could be a dead end, right? I don't want you getting your hopes up without." "I know, Tom." Jack cut him off, his voice tight. "But I can't just walk away from this. I need to know." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "All right, I'll get back to you as soon as I have something." Jack hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He felt like he was teetering on the edge of something enormous, like his whole world could be turned upside down at any moment. He tried to focus, to think clearly, but his mind kept drifting back to Emily. How she had looked at him with those big, searching eyes, how her tiny voice had echoed in his mind long after she had spoken. "My mommy had a necklace like yours." Jack's fingers tightened around the pendant again. He knew he was clinging to a fragile hope, but it was all he had. He took a deep breath and pushed himself away from the desk, grabbing his coat. Sitting here, waiting, was going to drive him insane. He needed to be doing something. Later that evening, Jack found himself back at St. Agnes, standing in the dimly lit courtyard. The air was cool and crisp, the sky above dotted with stars. He had told himself that he was just checking on the donation paperwork with Father O'Reilly, but he knew that wasn't the real reason. He needed to see Emily again, to talk to her, to find out if there was something more that she remembered. He spotted her sitting alone on a bench under a large oak tree, a book in her lap. She looked so small, so fragile, surrounded by the shadows of the towering building. Jack's heart ached as he approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hey, Emily," he said softly, his voice gentle. She looked up, her eyes widening in surprise, then softening into a small smile. "Hi, Mr. Jack," she replied, closing her book carefully and setting it aside. "Are you back to see Father O'Reilly?" Jack shook his head, sitting down on the bench beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Actually, I came to see you." Her eyes widened again, a spark of curiosity and confusion flickering in them. "Me? Why?" Jack hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I wanted to ask you about the necklace. You said your mommy had one like mine. Do you remember anything else about it? Emily frowned, her small face scrunched up in concentration. I don't know. It was shiny, and she wore it all the time. But I don't really remember much else. I was little. Jack nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. He couldn't push her too hard. She was just a child, after all. But every word she said felt like a clue, a tiny piece of a much larger puzzle. Do you remember anything about your mommy? He asked gently. What she looked like, what her name was. Emily's eyes darkened, and she shook her head slowly. I don't remember her face. Sometimes I dream about her, but it's like looking through a window when it's raining. I can't see clearly. Her words struck a chord deep inside him. He knew that feeling, that desperate longing to see someone you loved but couldn't quite remember. He felt a surge of emotion, and before he could stop himself, he reached out and took her small hand in his. I'm so sorry, Emily, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. I wish I could help you remember. Emily looked at him, her eyes searching his face. For a long moment, they just sat there, the silence stretching between them, filled with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Then she squeezed his hand gently. It's okay, Mr. Jack. Sometimes I feel sad, but Father says I have a new family now. All the kids here, they're my brothers and sisters. And I have you too, right? Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Jack blinked, struggling to keep his composure. He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. Yeah, Emily, you have me too. They sat there for a while longer, under the stars, talking about small things. Her favorite books, the games she played with the other kids, her dreams of becoming a teacher one day. Jack listened, his heart aching and hopeful all at once. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let go of this little girl. Not now, not ever. When he finally left the orphanage that night, his mind was clearer than it had been in years. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he had a direction, a purpose. He would find out the truth about Emily, no matter what it took, because deep down, he knew that she wasn't just any little girl. She was a part of him, a part he had thought he'd lost forever. As he walked away from St. Agnes, the lights of the city twinkling in the distance, Jack felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was a fragile, delicate thing, but it was there, growing stronger with every step he took. Jack's phone buzzed on his desk early the next morning, startling him out of a restless sleep. He had fallen asleep in his office, slumped over files and papers, his mind still racing with thoughts of Emily. He fumbled for the phone, his heart leaping when he saw Tom Sanders' name on the screen. Tom, he answered, his voice thick with sleep and nerves. Did you find something? There's something you need to see, Jack, Tom said, his tone serious but controlled. I managed to get access to some old hospital records. There's an anomaly that you'll want to take a look at. Jack's stomach twisted with anticipation. I'm on my way. He grabbed his coat and headed out, his heart pounding with every step. The drive to Tom's office felt like an eternity, each stoplight and turn stretching his nerves tighter. When he finally arrived, Tom was waiting for him, a manila folder in hand. Come in, Tom said, his face set in a grim line. He led Jack to his desk and spread out several documents. This is the hospital report from the night of the accident. It lists the casualties and survivors. Jack leaned over the papers, his eyes scanning the columns of names. His breath caught when he saw Sophia's name, marked with a cold, brutal deceased. It felt like a punch to the gut, even though he'd seen it 100 times before. But then Tom pointed to another section, where things got confusing. Look here, Tom said, tapping a different page. There's an entry under the initial report that was changed later. The original indicated a young girl, about Sophia's age, was admitted in critical condition but alive. That was updated hours later to deceased, but there's no corresponding death certificate or medical report to back it up. Jack's heart raced as he processed the information. Are you saying they made a mistake? Tom nodded slowly. It's possible. Records from that night were a mess. Emergency services were overwhelmed, and there were inconsistencies. But what's even more interesting is that a few days later, an anonymous request was made to have the girl's medical records sealed. It's unusual, Jack. Someone didn't want that information getting out. Jack felt the ground shift beneath him. If this was true, if there was even a chance, what about adoption records? Could she have been placed somewhere under a different name? Tom hesitated, then nodded. That's what I'm working on now. But if she was placed into the system, it was likely done quietly. There could be legal barriers to accessing those files, especially if they were sealed. Jack's mind was racing. Can you find out who made that request? Who wanted those records sealed? Tom glanced at the papers again, his expression thoughtful. It's tricky, but I've got some contacts. I'll dig deeper, see if I can trace it back to someone. But Jack, you need to prepare yourself. Even if we find something, it might not be what you're hoping for. Jack nodded, though his thoughts were already spiraling in 100 different directions. He knew Tom was right. This could all lead to a dead end, another heartbreak. But he also knew he couldn't stop now, not when he was this close. Keep me posted, Jack said, standing up and grabbing the folder. I need to head back to the orphanage. Tom raised an eyebrow. You think Emily knows something? I'm not sure, Jack admitted, but I need to be with her. If she's my daughter, she deserves to know the truth. And if she's not, his voice trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Tom gave him a steady look. Good luck, Jack. I hope you find what you're looking for. Back at St. Agnes, the air was filled with the sounds of children playing in the courtyard. Jack watched from a distance, his eyes scanning the group until he spotted Emily sitting alone under the same oak tree, her knees drawn up to her chest. She was staring at the sky, her face thoughtful and far away. He took a deep breath and approached her, trying to keep his emotions in check. Hey, Emily, he said softly, crouching down beside her. Do you mind if I sit with you? She looked up and nodded, her expression brightening slightly. Of course, Mr. Jack. Are you here to visit again? He smiled, feeling a strange mix of nerves and affection. Yeah, I guess I am. I wanted to talk to you, if that's okay. Emily nodded, her eyes curious. Sure. What about? Jack hesitated, trying to find the right words. How did you explain something like this to a child? I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday, about your mommy and the necklace. She looked down, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. I didn't mean to make you sad. I don't really remember her. Just little things. You didn't make me sad, Emily, Jack said gently. I'm just trying to understand. Do you remember anything else? Anything at all? She bit her lip, thinking hard. Sometimes I dream about her, but I don't know if they're real or if I'm just making them up. She had dark hair, like me, and she used to sing to me. But it's all fuzzy. Jack's heart ached as he listened. He could almost see Sophia in his mind's eye, singing softly to a little girl who might be Emily. His chest tightened, and he had to force himself to stay calm. Emily, if you could find out more about your mommy, would you want to? He asked, his voice soft and steady. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. Do you think you could find out? I don't know, Jack said honestly, but I'd like to try. Would that be okay with you? Emily nodded slowly, a small smile forming on her lips. Yeah, I'd like that. Jack reached out and took her hand, his grip gentle but firm. I'm going to do everything I can, okay? Whatever it takes, we're going to find out the truth. She squeezed his hand, her small fingers warm and trusting against his. Thank you, Mr. Jack. Jack looked at her, his heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. Whether or not she was his daughter, he knew one thing for sure. He would never let her go. He would fight for her happiness, and for the answers they both needed. As they sat there together, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the courtyard, Jack felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just searching for his daughter anymore. He was searching for hope, for redemption, for a chance to build something new from the ashes of his broken past. And with Emily beside him, he knew he wouldn't stop until he found it. Over the next few days, Jack threw himself into the search for answers with a single-minded determination that bordered on obsession. He barely slept, his mind consumed with every possible lead, every small piece of evidence that could point to the truth. Tom's updates were sporadic but promising. The deeper they dug, the more inconsistencies they uncovered. Missing records, altered documents, the faint trail of a secret that someone had gone to great lengths to bury. Each revelation brought a surge of hope, but also fear. What if all this searching led to nothing? What if the truth wasn't what he hoped it would be? But whenever doubt threatened to overwhelm him, he thought of Emily. Her small hand in his, her eyes filled with a longing she didn't quite understand. That was all he needed to keep going. One evening, as Jack was poring over a set of newly acquired files in his office, his phone buzzed. It was Tom. "Jack, I think I've found something," Tom said, his voice steady but with a hint of excitement. "I've traced the request to seal Emily's records back to a private adoption agency. The agency was shut down a few years ago under some very shady circumstances, but I managed to get a contact who used to work there." Jack's pulse quickened. "What did they say?" "There's a file," Tom continued. "It's sealed, but my contact believes it might contain information about a child matching Emily's description. It's not much, but it's more than we've had so far. Can we get access to it?" Jack asked, trying to keep the urgency out of his voice. "It won't be easy," Tom admitted. "We're talking about legal hoops and potential court orders, but I've started the process. It'll take some time." Jack let out a slow breath, his mind racing. Time. It was the one thing he didn't want to waste, but he knew he had to be patient. "Do whatever it takes, Tom. I don't care how much it costs." "I know, Jack. I'll keep you posted." When Jack hung up, he sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He felt both exhilarated and exhausted, the weight of the past few days pressing down on him. But there was a spark of hope now, something real to hold on to. He closed his eyes, the image of Emily's face filling his mind. He wasn't there yet, but he was getting closer. The following weekend, Jack returned to St. Agnes. He had been visiting every day, spending time with Emily, getting to know her in small, precious moments that he treasured. They played games, read books, and talked about everything and nothing. She seemed to open up to him more with each visit, her shy smiles and bursts of laughter filling a void he hadn't realized was still there. That Saturday afternoon, they were in the small library, sitting on the floor surrounded by stacks of picture books. Emily was curled up beside him, her head resting against his arm as they looked through a storybook about a family of bears. "Why do you like this one so much?" Jack asked, turning the pages slowly, savoring the peacefulness of the moment. Emily shrugged, her eyes fixed on the illustrations. "I like the way the little bear tries so hard to find his family. He doesn't give up, even when it's scary." Jack's heart twisted at her words. He glanced down at her, her face serious and thoughtful. "Do you ever feel like that? Like you're looking for something?" She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "Sometimes. I used to think I was looking for my mommy, but now, I think maybe I'm just looking for a place where I belong." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. "You belong here, Emily. And with me. I promise I'm going to be here for you, no matter what." She smiled then, a small, hopeful smile that lit up her face. "I'm glad you come to see me, Mr. Jack. I like spending time with you." Jack reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I like spending time with you too, Emily. More than you know." They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in a bubble of quiet contentment. For the first time in years, Jack felt something inside him begin to heal. He wasn't just chasing ghosts anymore. He was building something new, something real and beautiful. And it scared him. How much he wanted it. How much he wanted Emily to be his daughter. How much he wanted to be her father. But as much as he wanted to stay in that moment forever, he knew he couldn't. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many shadows lurking in the past. He had to find out the truth, for both of their sakes. 2 days later, Jack's phone rang again. It was Tom, and this time his voice was tense, urgent. "Jack, we've hit a breakthrough. I got access to part of the sealed file. It's not much, but there's a name, an alias, most likely, used to place Emily in the system. The same alias was linked to a woman who checked out of the hospital the night of the accident. She paid cash, left no trace. But get this, She was described as having injuries consistent with a car crash. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. "What are you saying, Tom?" "I'm saying it's possible that someone took your daughter from that hospital and placed her into the system under a false identity. The woman disappeared afterward, but the trail goes cold. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Jack's hands shook as he gripped the phone. "So, Emily could really be Sophia?" "It's possible, Jack. We're closer than we've ever been, but we need more proof. I'm going to keep digging, but I thought you should know." Jack's mind was spinning, 1,000 thoughts colliding at once. He thanked Tom and hung up, his heart pounding. He had to talk to Father O'Reilly, had to find out if there was anything in Emily's past that could confirm what Tom had just told him. He drove to St. Agnes, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of hope and fear. When he arrived, he found Father O'Reilly in his office, going over some paperwork. The priest looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Jack, I wasn't expecting you. Is everything all right?" Jack stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Father, I need to talk to you. It's about Emily." Father O'Reilly's expression shifted, concern lining his features. "What's going on?" Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I think Emily might be my daughter, Sophia. I know it sounds crazy, but there are things, details about her past, about her adoption, that don't add up." And now Tom found something, a lead that suggests she was taken from the hospital that night, placed in the system under a different name. The priest stared at him, stunned. "Jack, that's a lot to take in." "I know," Jack said quickly, "but I need to know if there's anything else, anything at all, that could help us confirm it. Anything from when she first arrived, documents, memories, anything." Father O'Reilly leaned back in his chair, his eyes troubled. "I've always known there was something different about Emily's case. When she first came to us, there were no clear records, no real history. Just a vague story about a car accident and an anonymous placement. But I never imagined—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Jack felt a surge of desperation. "Father, please. I need to know if there's anything more." The priest hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There might be one thing. A few months after Emily arrived, she had a nightmare, a terrible one. She woke up screaming about a car, about fire and a man. She kept saying, 'Daddy, don't go.' It was the only time she ever spoke about her past." Jack's heart clenched painfully. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I didn't think it was relevant," Father O'Reilly said softly. "She was just a child, Jack. I thought it was just the trauma of losing her adoptive parents. But now—" Jack nodded, his mind reeling. "Thank you, Father. I need to follow up on this. I'll do whatever it takes to find the truth." Father O'Reilly reached out and placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "Be careful, Jack. The truth can be a heavy burden. Whatever happens, you need to be prepared." Jack swallowed hard, meeting the priest's gaze. "I don't care how heavy it is. I just need to know." As he left the office, his heart pounding, Jack felt a fierce determination settle over him. He was closer than ever to finding the answers he sought, and he wasn't going to stop until he knew the truth, no matter what it cost him. Enjoying the video? Subscribe to our channel to receive more interesting content. Click the subscribe button and stay updated with the latest news. The next few days were a blur of activity. Jack barely left his office, his phone constantly buzzing with updates from Tom. He felt like he was teetering on the edge of something monumental, a breakthrough that would either bring him the answers he desperately needed or shatter his fragile hope into pieces. Each night, he would collapse into his chair, staring at the ceiling as his mind replayed every new piece of information they'd uncovered. He thought of Emily, her sweet smile and the way her eyes seemed to light up when he walked into the room. It was almost too much to believe that she could be Sophia, that she had been alive all this time, hidden away from him. But the signs were there, small but unmistakable, leading him closer and closer to the truth. On the third day, just as the sun was setting, Tom called again. His voice was tense, urgent. "Jack, I've got something. You need to see this." Jack's pulse quickened as he grabbed his keys and headed out the door. The drive to Tom's office felt like an eternity, but when he finally arrived, Tom was already waiting for him, his face grim. "I got access to more of the adoption records," Tom said, leading Jack to his desk. There's a pattern in the paperwork. Dates, names, all matching up with that alias we found. It's clear that someone was moving Emily around, trying to keep her off the radar. Jack's heart pounded as he looked at the documents spread out in front of him. Who was it? Who took her? Tom shook his head. I don't have a name yet, but I've got something better. There's a lawyer who handled the adoption, someone who's been involved in cases like this before. If we can find him, we might get the answers we need. Jack's hands tightened on the edge of the desk. Where is he? Tom hesitated. He's off the grid, Jack. Last known address was in upstate New York, but that was years ago. It's going to be a challenge to track him down. Jack's mind raced. I don't care what it takes. Find him, Tom. I need to talk to him. I'm on it, Tom said. But in the meantime, there's something else you should know. I found a birth certificate, one that could be Emily's. It's under a different name, but the dates line up. If it's real, it proves she was born around the time of the accident. Jack stared at the piece of paper Tom handed him. It felt surreal, holding something so fragile, so potentially life-changing. He traced the name with his fingers, Anna Moore. A name that meant nothing and everything all at once. Is there any way to be sure? Jack asked, his voice thick with emotion. Tom's eyes were sympathetic. A DNA test, maybe, but we need her medical records for that, and those are still sealed. Jack felt a surge of frustration, the hope that had been building inside him wavering. So, what do we do now? Tom looked at him steadily. We keep going. We're close, Jack. I can feel it. We just need a little more time. Jack nodded, his throat tight. Thank you, Tom. I don't know what I'd do without you. We'll get there, Jack. One way or another. That evening, Jack returned to the orphanage, his mind buzzing with everything Tom had told him. He found Emily in the common room, sitting with a group of children, coloring quietly. Her face lit up when she saw him, and she ran over, her small arms wrapping around his waist. Mr. Jack, she exclaimed, looking up at him with a beaming smile. I missed you. Jack felt his heart swell as he knelt down to her level, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. I missed you too, Emily. How was your day? She shrugged, her eyes sparkling. It was okay. We had art class, and I made a new drawing. Do you want to see? Of course, Jack said, smiling. Show me. She led him over to a table where her drawing lay, a colorful picture of a house with a garden, a big sun shining down from the corner of the page. In front of the house were two figures, a tall man with dark hair and a little girl with a smile as wide as the sun itself. This is you, she said, pointing to the man, and this is me. Jack stared at the drawing, a lump forming in his throat. He felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them away, forcing himself to smile. It's beautiful, Emily. I love it. I'm glad, she said, her voice softening. I like drawing us together. It makes me feel happy. Jack reached out and gently ruffled her hair. It makes me happy too, sweetheart. They spent the next hour together, talking and playing, the rest of the world fading away. Jack found himself laughing more easily, his heart lighter than it had been in years. But underneath the joy, there was a persistent, aching question. Was this the life he was meant to have, the family he'd lost and found again? Or was he setting himself up for another devastating loss? As the evening wore on, Jack knew he had to talk to Father O'Reilly again. He needed to make sure Emily was safe, that no one would come looking for her before they had the answers. He found the priest in his office, going over some paperwork. Father, do you have a minute? Jack asked, stepping inside. Of course, Jack. What's on your mind? Father O'Reilly set his pen down, his expression attentive. I need to know more about Emily's case, Jack said, taking a seat across from him. I need to know if there's any chance someone might try to take her away. The priest's brows furrowed. Take her away? Why would you think that? There's more going on here than we realized, Jack said carefully. There's a lawyer involved, someone who's been moving Emily around. I don't know who they are or what their intentions were, but if they find out I'm looking into this. Father O'Reilly's eyes widened with concern. Are you saying she's in danger? I don't know, Jack admitted, but I can't take any chances. I need to know she's safe. The priest leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. I'll look into it, see if there's anything we can do to secure her status here. But, Jack, you're talking about some serious allegations. Are you sure this is the right path? Jack nodded, his jaw set. I have to know, Father. I can't just walk away. Father O'Reilly sighed, his expression a mix of resignation and compassion. I understand. I'll do what I can to help. Just be careful. The truth can be a dangerous thing. Jack thanked him and left the office, his mind spinning. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into a dark, unknown chasm. But he couldn't turn back now, not when he was this close. That night, as he lay in bed, Jack's thoughts drifted back to Emily. He thought about the way she had looked at him, her eyes full of trust and hope. It terrified him, the possibility of letting her down, of losing her again. But he couldn't let that fear stop him. He had to keep going, had to find out the truth, no matter what it took. He drifted off to sleep with her drawing on the nightstand beside him, the picture of the two of them together, a small beacon of light in the darkness. He knew the road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and potential heartbreak. But he also knew he couldn't stop now, because somewhere, beneath all the pain and confusion, was the hope that he had found his daughter again. And that hope, fragile and precious as it was worth fighting for. Jack's thoughts were consumed by the revelations of the past week as he navigated through his morning routine, each movement automatic and detached. He had barely slept, his mind replaying every detail of his conversations with Tom and Father O'Reilly, every moment he had spent with Emily. His heart felt both full and fragile, a delicate balance of hope and fear that left him breathless. Tom had called again late last night, telling Jack that he'd made contact with the elusive lawyer who had handled Emily's adoption. The man was willing to talk, but he was cautious, insisting on a private meeting far from prying eyes. Jack's stomach twisted at the thought of what he might learn, but he knew he had no choice. This could be the key to unraveling the mystery that had haunted him for years. The meeting was set for the following afternoon, in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Jack arrived early, his nerves buzzing with anticipation and dread. He sat at a corner table, his eyes fixed on the door, watching each person who entered with a mix of hope and anxiety. Finally, a man in his late 50s stepped in, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Jack. He was tall, with graying hair and a wary, guarded expression. Jack stood as the man approached, extending his hand. "Thank you for meeting with me." The lawyer shook his hand briefly, then sat down, glancing around the cafe as if expecting someone to be watching. "I don't have much time, Mr. Montgomery, and I'm not sure how much help I can be." Jack leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "All I need are answers. Emily, Anna, whatever name she was given, I need to know the truth. Who took her from that hospital and why?" The lawyer's eyes flickered with something Jack couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or guilt. He sighed and looked down at his hands. "It's a long story and a complicated one. The woman who brought the child to me was desperate. She said the girl's family had been killed in an accident and that she was the only survivor. She wanted the child placed in a safe home, somewhere she wouldn't be found." Jack's heart pounded. Did she say why? Who was she hiding from? The lawyer hesitated, glancing around again. "I didn't ask too many questions. I should have, but I didn't. All I know is that she was terrified. She mentioned something about powerful people, about the child being in danger if she stayed where she was." Jack felt a surge of anger and frustration. "That child was my daughter. My family thought she was dead. Why didn't you come forward when you found out?" "I didn't know," the lawyer said sharply, his voice rising before he caught himself. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "By the time I realized there was something more going on, it was too late. She was already in the system, under a new name. I couldn't trace her." Jack clenched his fists under the table, struggling to control the torrent of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Do you have any idea who that woman was? Where she is now?" The lawyer shook his head. "I wish I did. She disappeared not long after that. No trace, no name. It's like she vanished into thin air." Jack felt the hope that had been burning inside him flicker and dim. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Is there anything else? Any detail, no matter how small? The lawyer hesitated, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, faded photograph. He slid it across the table. This was taken the day she brought the girl to me. I kept it in case. I don't know, maybe I thought someday it might matter. Jack picked up the photo with trembling hands. It showed a woman holding a little girl with dark hair, her face turned away from the camera. The woman's face was shadowed, her features indistinct, but there was something familiar about the shape of her jaw, the curve of her cheek. Do you recognize her? The lawyer asked quietly. Jack shook his head, his eyes fixed on the small, blurred image. No, but I will. I'll find her. The lawyer stood, his expression somber. I'm sorry, Mr. Montgomery. I wish I could help more, but I think you're right. Whoever took her, they did it for a reason. And I'm not sure it's a reason you're going to like. Jack nodded, his mind already racing ahead, trying to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. Thank you for this and for meeting me. The lawyer gave him a brief, tight smile. Good luck, Mr. Montgomery. I hope you find what you're looking for. As the man left, Jack sat alone in the cafe, the photograph still clutched in his hand. He stared at it, willing the blurred lines and shadows to sharpen, to reveal the face of the woman who had taken his daughter, who had kept her hidden from him for all these years. Back at the orphanage, Jack found Emily playing outside with a group of children. She looked up as he approached, her face breaking into a bright smile. Mr. Jack, she called, running over to him. You're back. Jack felt a pang of guilt as he looked down at her, so small and full of trust. He had spent so much time searching for answers, but what would happen if he found them? What if the truth tore this fragile happiness apart? Hey, sweetheart, he said, kneeling down to her level. How was your day? Good. I made a new friend, she said, glancing back at a little boy who waved shyly. We played tag and I won. Jack smiled, his heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. That's great. I'm glad you're having fun. She nodded, then looked at him with a seriousness that seemed far beyond her years. Are you okay, Mr. Jack? You look sad. Jack swallowed hard, forcing himself to smile. I'm okay, Emily. Just thinking about some things. Is it about me? She asked, her voice small and hesitant. Jack felt his heart twist. How could she know? He reached out and took her hand gently. Yeah, it is. But it's nothing you need to worry about. I'm just trying to figure out some stuff. Grown-up stuff. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded, squeezing his hand. Okay, but I'm here if you want to talk, even though I'm not a grown-up. Jack laughed softly, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. Thank you, Emily. That means a lot to me. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, playing and talking. The dark clouds that had been hanging over Jack's heart lifting, if only for a little while. He knew he had to keep searching, to find the answers that would either confirm or shatter his hopes. But for now, he was grateful just to be here, with her, in this moment. That night, as he lay in bed, Jack turned the small photograph over and over in his hands. He knew that finding the woman in the picture was the next step, the only way to get the truth. But he also knew it would come with risks. Risks that could put Emily in danger. Risks that could shatter the fragile bond they were building. But he couldn't stop now. Not when he was so close. He had to keep going, to find out who had taken his daughter and why. He had to protect Emily, no matter what. As he closed his eyes, the image of the little girl in the photograph blurred into Emily's face, her smile bright and trusting. Jack knew that whatever happened next, he wouldn't let her go. He would fight for her, for the truth, for their future, no matter what it cost him, because he knew, with every fiber of his being, that she was worth it. The tension was almost unbearable as Jack waited for Tom's next update. Every day felt like an eternity, each hour stretching out in an agonizing mix of hope and fear. He couldn't shake the image of the photograph from his mind. The blurred faces, the woman who had taken his daughter and vanished into the shadows. It haunted his thoughts, even as he spent more time at St. Agnes, building a bond with Emily that felt more precious and fragile with each passing day. One evening, after he'd read Emily to sleep, Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Tom. He stepped out into the hallway, his heart pounding. "Jack, I found her," Tom said, his voice strained but triumphant. "The woman in the photograph, her name is Helen Fisher. She's been living under an assumed identity, working odd jobs, staying off the grid. But I've got an address." Jack's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. But the excitement was tempered with a deep, gnawing fear. What if the answers he found weren't the ones he wanted? What if they led to more heartbreak? "Where is she?" he asked, his voice tight. "Upstate New York, near a small town called Beacon. It's a few hours' drive." "I can go with you if you want," Tom offered. Jack shook his head, even though Tom couldn't see him. "No, I need to do this alone." Tom hesitated, then sighed. "All right, but Jack, be careful. We don't know what we're walking into." "I will," Jack promised. "Thank you, Tom, for everything." He ended the call and stood there for a long moment, the silence of the orphanage pressing in around him. He glanced back at the room where Emily was sleeping, her small form curled up under the blankets. His heart ached with a fierce, protective love. He had to do this for her, for them both. The next morning, Jack hit the road early, the sky still streaked with the pink and gold hues of dawn. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, fears, and hopes. He tried to focus on the drive, the miles slipping by in a blur of trees and asphalt, but his heart was pounding, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Beacon was a quiet, unassuming town nestled at the foot of a range of wooded hills. Jack followed the directions Tom had given him, his pulse quickening as he turned onto a narrow, winding road that led deeper into the forest. The address was for a small, run-down house at the end of a dirt driveway, hidden among the trees. He parked the car and sat there for a moment, staring at the house. It looked abandoned, the paint peeling, the windows dark and empty. But there was a car in the driveway, a battered old sedan covered in dust. Someone was here. Taking a deep breath, Jack stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door. His heart was hammering in his chest as he raised his hand and knocked, the sound echoing hollowly through the stillness. There was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked open, and a woman stood there, her eyes wide with shock. She looked older than she had in the photograph, her hair streaked with gray, lines of worry etched into her face. But there was no mistaking her. She was the woman who had taken his daughter. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "My name is Jack Montgomery. I'm here about my daughter." Her eyes widened further, and she took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, I knew this day would come. I didn't think it would be you." Jack's heart raced, a mix of anger and desperation surging through him. "You took her from the hospital. You made us believe she was dead. Why? Why did you do it?" The woman, Helen, looked around, as if expecting someone to be watching, then gestured for him to come inside. Jack hesitated, then followed her, his hands clenched at his sides. The interior of the house was sparse, almost bare, as if she had never intended to stay long. She led him to a small, dimly lit living room and motioned for him to sit. Jack remained standing, his eyes fixed on her. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to do it, but I had no choice. They made me." "Who?" Jack demanded. "Who made you take her?" She sank down onto the edge of a worn couch, her hands trembling. "There were people, powerful people, who didn't want your daughter to stay with you. They said it was for her safety, that you were in danger. They told me I was saving her life." Jack felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "What are you talking about? Who were these people?" Helen shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know who they were. They contacted me through an intermediary, told me what to do. I was supposed to keep her hidden, make sure she stayed out of sight. But then they disappeared. I didn't know what to do, so I put her in the system, tried to give her a normal life." Jack's hands were shaking. "You gave her to an orphanage? You just abandoned her?" Tears streamed down Helen's face. "I thought it was the safest place for her. I didn't know what else to do. I'm so sorry, Mr. Montgomery. I never wanted to hurt you. Or her." Jack took a deep, shuddering breath, struggling to keep his emotions in check. "She's my daughter. You had no right." "I know," she whispered. "I know, but I didn't see any other way." Jack felt a surge of anger, the years of pain and loss boiling over. "You took everything from me. Do you have any idea what that did to my family? To me? I'm so sorry," Helen sobbed, her hands covering her face. "I'm so sorry." For a moment, Jack was consumed by rage, the urge to scream at her, to demand answers she couldn't give. But then he thought of Emily, of her smile, her laugh, the way she looked at him with so much trust and love, and the anger drained away, leaving only a hollow, aching sadness. "Where are they now?" he asked quietly. "The people who made you do this?" Helen shook her head. "I don't know. I've been looking over my shoulder for years, waiting for them to come back, but they never did. I think they're gone, but I can't be sure." Jack closed his eyes, the weight of it all pressing down on him. He had come here for answers, and now that he had them, he wasn't sure what to do next. All he knew was that he had to protect Emily, to make sure she was safe from whatever shadows still lurked in their past. "Do you have anything, any information that could help me find them?" he asked, his voice steady. Helen wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. "There are some documents. I kept them, just in case. I'll get them." She disappeared into a back room, and Jack stood there, his heart pounding. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath him. He had come so far, but there was still so much he didn't know, so much that could still go wrong. Helen returned with a small, battered box. She handed it to him, her hands shaking. "This is all I have. I hope it helps." Jack took the box, his fingers brushing against hers. For a moment, he looked at her, really looked at her. The lines of pain and fear etched into her face, the guilt and sorrow in her eyes. She wasn't a monster, just a woman who had made terrible choices, who had been caught up in something much bigger than herself. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me this." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears again. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Montgomery. I wish I could go back and change everything." Jack nodded, his heart heavy. "We can't change the past, but I'm going to make sure my daughter has a future. A good one." He turned and walked out of the house, the box clutched tightly in his hands. As he drove away, his mind was racing with everything he had learned, everything he still needed to do. The answers were close now, almost within reach. But he knew that finding the truth was only the beginning. He had to protect Emily, to keep her safe from whatever shadows still lingered in their past. And he would do whatever it took to make sure she was never taken from him again. Because he knew, now more than ever, that she was his daughter. And he wasn't going to lose her, not again. Jack's hands trembled as he placed the box on his kitchen table. He stared at it for a long moment, his heart pounding. It was just an ordinary cardboard box, but he knew it held the key to everything. Answers, closure, and the truth he had been chasing for so long. He took a deep breath and carefully lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of old documents, photographs, and letters, all yellowed and worn with age. He picked up a few papers, his eyes scanning them quickly. Adoption forms, hospital records, and legal documents with names he didn't recognize. He flipped through them, his heart racing faster with each passing moment, until he found something that made him freeze. It was a letter, written in a hurried, scrawled hand. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry. I did what I thought was right, but I know it wasn't enough. They're dangerous, and they won't stop. Keep her safe. Protect her from them, from the life they wanted for her. Her name is Sophia. Don't let them find her. Don't let her be a pawn in their game." Jack's breath caught in his throat as he read the words over and over, the realization crashing over him like a wave. They had been using Emily, Sophia, as a pawn, a piece in some twisted game he still didn't fully understand. But whoever they were powerful, and they weren't going to stop just because he had found her. He needed help, someone who could take these fragments of information and turn them into something concrete. He grabbed his phone and called Tom. "Tom, I've got something," Jack said as soon as he heard Tom's voice. "Documents, letters, they talk about Sophia, About people trying to use her for something. I don't know what it is, but it's big. Bring them over, Tom replied, his voice urgent. We'll go through them together. Jack nodded, already gathering the papers back into the box. I'm on my way. When he arrived at Tom's office, the sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the room. Tom was waiting for him, his expression tense and focused. Jack placed the box on the desk and started pulling out the documents, laying them out in front of Tom. This letter, Jack said, pointing to the note he had found. It's from the woman who took Sophia. She's warning about people who wanted to use her, but I don't know who they are or what they want. Tom picked up the letter, his eyes scanning it quickly. He frowned, then reached for a stack of papers and began flipping through them, his expression growing more serious by the second. Jack, he said slowly, this isn't just about adoption or hiding a child. These names, these references, they point to something much darker. These people have connections, political, financial. They operate in the shadows, manipulating things from behind the scenes. And if they were interested in Sophia, Jack felt a cold dread settle in his chest. What are you saying, Tom? I'm saying they're dangerous, Tom replied, his voice low. And if they find out you're looking into this, they'll come after you and her. Jack's hands clenched into fists. I don't care. I'm not going to stop until I know the truth. Tom nodded, his eyes meeting Jack's. Then we need to be smart about this. We need to get more information, figure out who these people are, and how to protect Emily. For the next few hours, they pored over the documents, piecing together fragments of a conspiracy that seemed too vast and too intricate to believe. Names and dates, coded messages, and hidden connections, all leading back to a network of power brokers and influencers who saw Sophia as a tool, a means to an end. And the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. By the time they finished, the sun was rising, and Jack felt like his world had been turned upside down. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let anyone take his daughter away from him again, no matter what it took. I need to go to the orphanage, Jack said finally, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. I need to see her. Tom nodded. Go. I'll keep digging, see what else I can find. But Jack, be careful. Jack nodded, his eyes hard. I will. The drive to St. Agnes was a blur. Jack's mind was racing, his thoughts tangled in a chaotic whirl of fear and determination. He had spent so long searching for answers, and now that he had them, he felt more uncertain than ever. But one thing was clear. He needed to protect Emily, no matter what. When he arrived, the orphanage was quiet, the early morning light casting a soft glow over the building. He made his way inside, his heart pounding as he headed to the common room where he knew Emily would be. She was there, sitting on the floor with a book in her lap, her brow furrowed in concentration. Emily, he called softly. She looked up, her face breaking into a radiant smile. Mr. Jack, you're back. Jack's heart swelled as he walked over to her, kneeling down to her level. Hey, sweetheart, I missed you. I missed you too, she said, throwing her arms around his neck. Jack hugged her tightly, his eyes closing as he held her close. She felt so small, so vulnerable, and he knew he would do anything to keep her safe. Emily, we need to talk, he said gently, pulling back to look into her eyes. There are some things I need to tell you. Important things. She looked at him, her expression serious. What is it? Jack took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he held hers. I've been looking for you for a long time, and I found out something that changes everything. She tilted her head, confusion clouding her eyes. What do you mean? Jack's throat tightened, his heart aching. You're my daughter, Emily. You're Sophia. There was a long, stunned silence as she stared at him, her eyes wide and searching. Then, slowly, she shook her head. But my name is Emily. I don't remember. Jack's heart broke as he saw the confusion and fear in her eyes. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands. I know, sweetheart. I know it's a lot to understand. But you are Sophia, and I'm your dad. I've always been your dad. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at him, her little hands gripping his tightly. "You're my daddy?" Jack nodded, his own eyes filling with tears. "Yes, baby. I'm your daddy." She let out a small, broken sob and threw herself into his arms, her body shaking as she cried. Jack held her close, his own tears spilling over as he rocked her gently, whispering soothing words. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. But I'm here now. I'm never going to leave you again." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, their hearts finally finding a piece of the healing they both needed so desperately. Jack knew there were still so many challenges ahead, so many dangers lurking in the shadows. But in that moment, all that mattered was that he had found her, that she was in his arms, where she belonged. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Jack knew he had to make a decision. He couldn't keep Emily at the orphanage, not with the threat of those people hanging over them. He had to take her somewhere safe, somewhere they could start to build a life together without fear. He pulled back, looking into her tear-streaked face. "Emily, we're going to go somewhere safe, okay? Just you and me. We're going to be a family." She nodded, sniffling as she wiped her eyes. "Okay, Daddy. I want to be with you." Jack's heart soared at the word, the first time she had called him that. He stood, holding her hand as they made their way out of the orphanage, out into the world that suddenly seemed so much brighter. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still people who wanted to hurt them, who wanted to use Sophia for their own purposes. But Jack was determined. He would protect her, no matter what. He would fight for their future, for their happiness. Because now, after everything they had been through, he finally had his daughter back. And he wasn't going to let anything take her away from him ever again. As they drove away from the orphanage, the city falling away behind them, Jack glanced at Emily in the rearview mirror. She was watching the world go by, her face calm, a small smile playing at her lips. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked softly. She looked at him, her eyes bright with a hope he hadn't seen in them before. "I'm happy, Daddy. Really happy." Jack's throat tightened, a fierce, overwhelming love flooding his heart. "Me too, baby. Me too." And for the first time in years, he truly was. We hope you were moved and inspired by our story. We want to hear your opinion. Leave a comment below, share your impressions, and your own stories of resilience and hope. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next emotional videos. Join us on this journey and follow more incredible stories. See you next time.